as we proceed. We have a seminar which we should have started at 10. I'm a communist. Communists are known for time, so I worried when it's now way past the 10 o'clock. So our apologies, we're still trying to link with our main speaker in Cape Town. We are holding this seminar on the Africa Day. In 1963, the African leaders came together to establish Organization of African Unity. In 2002, it was renamed the African Union. We have this theme, instability on the continent and the African Continental Free Trade Area, the constructing implications. This is the theme that we are discussing in this seminar. We hope that by 1 p.m. we will be done. We've invited the former Minister of Trade and Industry, Comrade Rob Davis, to I'm advised that those that are driving should park on B2, not B1. Thank you. I was saying that we have invited the former Minister of Trade and Industry, Comrade Rob Davis, to speak to us. We are honored to have, he's linking us up online. We are honored to have Lela Nontobe Onhlela, my sister. I wouldn't want to call her comrade because I'm not sure if she want to be addressed in that manner. She's from Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Will be speaking to us, making a presentation. With Comrade Ian Bidos. He's an internationalist with vast experience in the political economy of Africa. Will be speaking to us. We know that in 2013, the African Union adopted the theme, silencing the guns in Africa, and the guns are not silent. We have thus invited a Sudanese national, who is the former ADF chairperson, Dr. Elgoni, Abdul Karim Elgoni, to speak to us on what is happening in Sudan. We have invited Dr. Brown Maba from the Heritage and Research Consultant to speak to us as well. So what we are going to do, we'll start with the minister to speak to us, and the other speakers will speak. Then at the end of all the presentations, we'll open the floor for presentations. We have requested our speakers that they will speak for 20 minutes. So we request that you take notes. So once again, we welcome you all to our seminar. So without wasting time, let me ask the minister to give us his presentation. Over to you, Minister.
Okay, well, thanks. Thank you very much, Comrade Chair. Let me say that, as you did say, I'm a former minister, probably more relevant to the subject I'm going to be presenting on. I'm a member on the Advisory Council of Industrialization and Trade that's convened by the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So quite a bit of what I'm going to say is sort of approach that the Advisory Council under the leadership of the Secretary General is trying to carve out for the Continental Free Trade Area. I think probably I should just say before I start, because I do have some slides, is that my implicit point of departure, which I'm not going to develop, is that the underdevelopment of the African continent, which is also at the roots of many of the issues of insecurity and conflict, derives from the fact that during colonialism, the continent was subordinated to the global north, the developed world, as producer and exporter of primary raw materials that we used in industrial processes elsewhere. And that our leaders from the time of Kwame Nkrumah onwards identified that it was necessary to move towards higher value-added production and to industrialize the continent. So if someone could put up my slides, please. The first couple of slides I just want to go very quickly through the basic architecture of the Continental Free Trade Area. What is it about? So the agreement of the African Continental Free Trade Area was signed by 54 of the 55 member states of the African Union. If you want to know who didn't, it's Eritrea. And by February of this year, 46 countries had deposited their instruments of ratification. So the formal membership is all up and done. The agreement entered into force in May 2019, when the required majority of countries, the required minimum of countries had actually ratified it. And during the phase one of the establishment of the CFTA, there's supposed to be the establishment of a free trade agreement, which is covering both trading goods and trading services. And the free trade agreement on trading goods, all the members of the Continental Free Trade Area are supposed to remove duties on 90% of their tariff lines over 5 years for those countries that are not least developed, and over 10 years for those countries that are least developed. And of the remaining 10% of tariff lines, 7% are to be designated sensitive, and the duties there are to be phased down over a slightly longer period, which is 10 years for non-least developed countries and 13 years for least developed countries. And only 3% of the tariff lines may be excluded altogether. That's the basic architecture of the trading goods agreement. The state parties are supposed to make offers and negotiate with each other. So they're supposed to offer, you're supposed to say, these are the tariff lines that I will remove duties of 90% on over 5 years. These are the ones I want to remove duties over 10 years, and these are the 3% I'm going to leave out. And you have to put that forward to all the other parties and negotiate over that. Most, I think, of members have done that already, but quite a lot of them have said that their offers are conditional on what ends up being agreed on something called rules of origin. And those rules of origin, they define the percentage of local content that has to be in a product that qualifies to be admitted duty-free in other parts of the continent. So the idea is goods that are produced on the continent, with, of course, some inputs coming from elsewhere, and the rules of origin define what that is. And the rules of origin on most lines are already agreed, but not on some of the sensitive areas like clothing and textiles, sugar, and automotive products. The trade in services liberalisation is also supposed to be taking place, but in defined sectors. So it's what's called a positive list. It doesn't say all sectors except the following. It says it only takes place in the sectors that we specifically outline, and the sectors that are already agreed are travel services, transport services, business services, telecommunication services, and financial services. So the next slide is telling us that the other protocols that is part of this that have to be negotiated and coming to forth in phase one, which is the current phase, are the rules of origin I've already mentioned, agreements on cooperation between customs administrations, agreements on something called trade facilitation, those are procedures to allow goods to enter countries, sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, these are the regulations that cover plant health, animal health, and so on, particularly agricultural products. And then the agreement provides for negotiations on what are called trade-related issues, investment agreement, intellectual property, competition, and a few others, which are supposed to enter into force in phase two. And the declaration says that the Continental Free Trade Area will contribute to the movement of capital and natural persons, but the movement of natural persons is left to other processes within the African Union. And the agreement also sets up institutions. So the heads of state are the top of the pyramid who oversee the process. There's a council of ministers. There's negotiating forums of officials. And then there's a secretariat, and the secretariat was established in 2020. It's based in Ghana, and the first Secretary General is Wamkeli Mene. Now, the next slide. African Continental Free Trade Area as a bloc. It's important, I think, to get this into perspective. It will be the world's 8th largest economy as a total bloc, with a combined gross domestic product of 2.5 trillion US dollars. So it's 8th behind the US, behind China, Japan, Germany, the UK, France, and India. The combined population of the Continental Free Trade Area is about 1.2 billion people, and it's hoped that the Continental Free Trade Area will boost intra-Africa trade by $30 to $40 billion annually and reduce the continent's overall trade deficit by half. That's the stated intent. So that's the sort of basic architecture of the Continental Free Trade Area. Let me say in the next slide that I think there were different kinds of ideas that underpinned the establishment of the free trade area. Some of them were pure trade. Trade liberalization was a good thing. Trade liberalization would lead to development. You have arrangements like this in the European Union, so let's have something like this for ourselves. You also had views coming up that trade liberalization is important towards the rest of the world, that we must all reduce and remove tariffs on the rest of the world. This is the globalization and neoliberal kind of argument. And there were people around who saw, particularly from outside the continent, who saw the Continental Free Trade Area as a stepping stone towards liberalization towards the world outside. But I think there's another view, which is called developmental regionalism or development integration. It actually says that what we need to really do is to use this larger market that's being created as a result of the free trade area. We need to use this as a tool to actually make steps towards industrializing. And if we look at the world and we see what's happened, particularly after the Great Recession of 2007-8, we've seen a country like China, which initially had started its industrialization by supplying finished manufactured goods to the developed world. It actually saw that there was a declining market, and also the developed world was becoming less and less reluctant to accept finished goods from developing countries. And so it turned to its domestic market. And it also then used its industrial policy to try to develop real technological leads in digital technology and green technology. And I think if you look around, you can see a country like India is also marching in a similar direction. But both of these countries have large populations and large domestic markets that can be a significant, although not exclusive, driver of development. Next slide, please. But if we look at individual African countries, we lack either the population or the domestic market to be a significant driver of any kind of deep industrialization. Even our regional economic communities are relatively modest. So SADC, for example, has 345 million people, which is about the same as the United States, but its combined GDP of $721 billion is just a bit more than Poland and slightly less than Switzerland. So it's not really offering us the scale. But a bloc that's the size of the world's 8th largest economy with 1.2 billion people would be the sort of bloc that could provide a thrust towards industrialization. But how would this happen? Next slide, please. I'm saying that there's a growing view that the operationalization of the Continental Free Trade Area cannot be just reduced to a trade arrangement, cannot just be reduced to all of these matters that I mentioned as part of the basic architecture. It needs to be accompanied and allow itself to be shaped by the construction of regional value chains. So what does that mean? So I'm saying that the term value chain refers to the full range of activities needed to create a product or services. Encompasses everything from the conception of the product and service that's going to be provided to its final distribution, includes the raw materials, acquisition of those, the manufacturing of all the components, the final assembly and packaging, marketing, branding, transport, logistics, and all that. That's a value chain. Now, there was an idea of global value chains. I'm speaking to the next slide, please. Global value chains that was advanced during the era of globalization, hyper-globalization, and neoliberalism. And it was saying that as a result of globalization, what we've got is we've got an increasing number of products that you can't identify any longer as products of any one country because they've got components from many countries assembled in many parts of the world and supplied to many parts of the world. And so that what they wanted to say was the products that were products of the world were replacing products of individual countries. Next slide, please. But the idea that they had at the time was that the way you become part of this, and these global value chains were where the highest quality value addition was taking place in the world. Well, the way you got into them was that you integrated yourself by liberalizing your tariffs towards the rest of the world, and you integrated yourself that way into value chains. Now, the problem with this, and as critics argued, was that it escaped a fundamental reality. The problem facing Africa is not that we are not in value chains, global value chains. We are, but we're in the wrong place. We're supplying the raw materials, which is the least and declining, the least valuable and declining place to be located in value chains. And that's the problem we've got. So it's not whether you're in or out, it's where you're located in the value chains. And we need to move from being just raw material producers to being producers of more diversified and value-added products. So the next slide, please. So the construction of regional value chains, I think as has increasingly been seen, needs to be something more there's something quite different from the global value chains through liberalization that is envisaged by the proponents of neoliberalism. So I include, and I've got a slide here, that includes a quotation from the two people who argue that to construct a regional value chain, you need to develop capacity to identify appropriate measures to strengthen regional cooperation. Deepening regional specialization and exchange needs an institutional framework to identify realistic projects, manage trade-offs between countries, and secure alignment around regulatory framework, trade facilitation, infrastructure development, and maintenance. Next slide. So what this is trying to say is that if we're going to build regional value chains, we actually need to have an active set of industrial, technology, and trade policies combined into a framework with some sort of institutional structure that is supporting the emergence of this across the value chains. If we built the value chains, we would start to see several countries producing components for products that could be assembled in one or more countries before being supplied to several countries, if not all countries, on the African continent. And this, of course, requires an active industrial policy. If this happened, we would not just see an increase in intra-regional trade, we'd see a change in its quality. We'd see more trade in intermediate products, which is actually the largest and fastest growing component of international trade that's taking place. So this is what we would need to see, and we would have to agree on the regulatory frameworks. There are many important regulations for industrial policy that are now national competences. We need greater harmonization of those. We need to identify and agree these through stakeholder engagement and research. And it definitely, when we talk about regulation, it's not about deregulation. It must also be us acting together to say that before we are willing to sell you raw materials, for example, we will insist on a certain level of processing. We will not simply become a dumping ground for your second-hand goods, which is a big issue in clothing and textiles and also in automotive products. Next slide, please. Then we also need to manage trade-offs. Smaller and less industrialized countries, and this is what we see now in the current discussions on rules of origin. They are able to perhaps attract people who come to them and say, we'll invest in your country in some industrial activity, but it'll be a very low level of industrial activity. We will allow you to sew the buttons onto the shirts that we have manufactured, and then you will, and then we want you to advocate for these products to be sold throughout the continent. And in other words, the rules of origin would have to be weak. Now, the problem with that is that we, the biggest beneficiaries of the Continental Free Trade Area would not be the locally produced products, some of which would have a higher value added would probably be excluded, but they would be the people who are bringing goods in from the rest of the continent. So I think these are the issues that need to be managed with a goal of promoting greater inclusivity in a context where we need to bring in all the various stakeholders. And there's quite a lot of, next slide please, there's quite a lot of work that's being done. Some of it's still in the level of informal discussions to identify possibilities and identify the kinds of regional value chains we need to be building. Now, the other issue I think that's important is the external orientation of the Continental Free Trade Area. So while it is a focus on a set of arrangements among ourselves, the relationship of the Continental Free Trade Area to the rest of the world is also an important issue. If we do not provide a significant margin of preference for products produced within the Continental Free Trade Area over competing products from the outside, we will lose the opportunities that it would create to support industrialization. So, although it's not going to be something that we necessarily need to adopt formally by moving to a customs union or something like that, we do need to have a greater coordination of positions about attitudes towards third parties who should be told that if you want to benefit from the Continental Trade Area, you come and establish a productive enterprise in one of our countries, and that you add value to our products, and then you will be able to qualify under the rules of origin, not by you coming along and benefiting because we are going to open up and allow you to bring your finished goods and benefit from the Continental Trade Area. So I'm saying the rollout of that requires a whole lot of coordination of issues. Now the heads of state, next slide please, the heads of state have agreed to prioritize the rollout of full global value chains. These are pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And one of the reasons for this was pretty obvious, that in COVID we saw that there was this thing called vaccine apartheid. That when the vaccines were available, the last place on earth to get the vaccines was our countries. So from that, we need to have more productive activity around pharmaceuticals. Agriculture and agro-process. This is an area where Africa has real potentiality. We have 60% of the world's cultivatable land. Automotive products is another area where there's a lot of work going on, and other transport equipment. And as I already mentioned, the Secretary General is prioritizing this. So I'm just saying that, by way of conclusion, that an approach that sees the Continental Free Trade Area as a driver of regional value chains is what I think we need to be developing. The last slide is that to say that this is going to take place through the process of consultation, negotiation, and the establishment of the kind of regulatory frameworks, as well as addressing some of the issues of investment finance and all the other things that are necessary to bring into place productive activity. What I can say by way of my last remark is that if we don't do this, as the world moves into very rapidly now, into this low carbon economy, we'll be left behind, and we will be just mere consumers of somebody else's products, while big changes are taking place, which could actually well mean that some of our existing industries are no longer able to function. So it's very, very important that we use this tool as a means of trying to promote economic diversification, move up the value chain, and in a word, enhance industrial development. So let me stop there and say thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much to Comrade Rob Davis, the former Minister of Trade and Industry. He's in Cape Town. We also invited comrades from the ANC. I'm sure they are here. Just across the road, Lutuli House, we have comrades from COSATU. I'm not sure if they've arrived. I see my comrades from the Communist Party, the Communist Party of Swaziland and the YCL. Thank you for attending, and all of you, thank you for coming. As I said, thanks Comrade Rob for all this information. I hope you will stay with us a little bit longer so that comrades can field the questions, but if we will not have much time, we will arrange questions to get to Comrade Rob so that we can continue with this engagement outside this seminar. As I said earlier on, that we invited Comrade Dobego from the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. It's second time that we meet in a seminar. She's going to speak to us, also elaborating on our theme, which we have said, instability on the continent and the African continental free trade area, the constructing implications. We are, as the African Diaspora Forum, an organization that it deals with the migrants, and one of the challenges that we face is that many countries across the continent, they see South Africa as industrialized, so you have migration that is down south. It is not spreading across the continent, and you know the challenges that it then brings. My sister, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And happy Africa Day.
Thank you.
Africa Day is one of those days that I think a lot of people in the world, in Africa itself, here in South Africa, if you were to ask your child what Africa Day means to them, if they even know that there is such a thing, most probably they don't know about it. Mm-hmm. And there is an indictment on us because I think as Africans we fail to look at our history and to preserve it and to talk about it and to teach our children about it. You go to other countries around the world and you see how their museums are filled with everything that they have ever done, the good, the bad, and everything. Yet in Africa, we, for some reason, have this tendency of just forgetting and moving on very fast and not looking back. And if we continue to do that, how do you go forward when you do not know your past and you do not deal with it and you make sure that the generations that come after you are actually part of that so that everyone is of the same vision going forward? So as we celebrate this 60th anniversary of the OAU, it is said that Africa remains the poorest and most underdeveloped continent on the planet, despite us being the continent blessed with the most natural resources on Earth. In 1960, China was poorer than the DRC, poorer than Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. In 1960, there are people here who were born before 1960. Today, China stands as the world's second largest economy and one that has been able to eradicate extreme poverty. Despite many initiatives, millions of people on the continent remain in extreme poverty. Africa remains divided and ridden with conflicts. Our founders must be turning in their graves when they see the failures and the damage that those that have come after them have been party to. One of the biggest problems that has scoured the continent since independence has been the endless conflicts. In 2013, the African Union came up with the Silencing the Guns by 2020 initiative. 2020 has come and gone, and Africa is still riddled by conflicts. From liberation conflicts to a growth in violent extremism, terrorism, conflicts linked to the excess of resources, and constitutional changes of government, coup d'etats, which had been in decline but which have in recent years increased, all continue to afflict the continent. The face of the conflict changes, but the root causes stay the same. Conflict is not the natural order of things for Africa. What continues to sustain conflict on the continent is a failure to deal decisively with the root causes. Some fundamental issues that have never been dealt with are the effects that colonialism and the decolonization process have had on governments. The colonies were formed and demarcated based on artificial borders that did not reflect the reality of the people. That did not reflect the reality of the people living in those lands. We have never dealt with those borders and redrawn them to reflect the cultures and histories of the peoples that live there, but have in fact protected these foreign drawn borders with all the problems that they continue to bring. Colonialism was never meant to allow for democratic formations. The colonial state was there to subjugate the population and keep it subservient. It was also meant to extract as much as possible, as Minister Rob Davis had said, from the colonized country's wealth and from its people. Colonial states only cared about their countries of origin and ensuring that the coffers of those capitals were constantly fed and filled. Development in the colonies be damned. At independence, the post-colonial state inherited these institutions, ones that did not care about the people beyond ensuring that they bowed to authority. This is one of the continuing factors that have contributed to conflict. The post-independence state has failed in its duty to protect and provide for its citizens and to develop the countries economically, politically, or socially. Instead, the political elites have become removed from the population and have failed to provide even the most basic of services. What African leaders have continued to do is to extract from their people, much the same as the colonial state, for their own enrichment. Even though Africa is wealthy in natural resources, the state has failed to manage these resources properly, leading to some of the minerally richest countries in the world being some of the most poor ones with the most poverty. This is compounded by the fact that African leaders continue to enforce policies that do not work for their people. There is a poverty of developmental ideas, and even when these ideas are promulgated by progressive academics and intellectuals, these are discarded by decision makers as they do not conform to what they have imbibed and believed to be proper policies. So we keep treading water without any forward movement and no change of course. Later today, we might be told that the interest rate has increased yet again in South Africa, while people are already struggling. And when we have the levels of unemployment that you only see in countries that are at war, yet we keep doing the same thing over and over again, and economists such as Duma Gqubule, who offer a different way of doing things, are constantly being shunned aside and not listened to because there's only one way of dealing with inflation, and that is to increase interest rates. The lack of delivery and poverty of ideas often results in increased protests against the state, particularly violent protests. Protests occur and increase in intensity because of grievances and the frustration of unmet aspirations for change, and the inability or unwillingness of government to respond effectively. This is very soon followed by attempts to undermine the process of government transition. This can happen through the rigging of elections or when incumbents lose elections but refuse to accept the results, or those that win elections then excluding certain portions of the population. Popular protests are one way of being able to measure the likelihood that a country will go through a contested government transition, which can lead to conflict. Soon people lose trust in the government and the governance system and look to actors that appear to have the people's best interests at heart, which might lead to unconstitutional changes of governments in those countries. When people are discontent and their needs are not being met by their governments, it becomes easy for people to be pulled into the ambit of extremists and terrorist factions, as has been seen in parts of the Sahel, Horn of Africa, and in Mozambique. External forces, of course, also continue to play a role in making the continent unstable. Conflicts such as the one started by the US-led NATO in Libya have contributed greatly to the destabilization and conflict on the continent, especially in the Sahel. The number of small arms that are available due to the war in Libya and because of returning fighters from that war coming back into their countries, they have also contributed and been cited for the increase in coup d'etats on the continent in recent times. This is exacerbated by the inability of African states to control the means of violence. Arms are supposed to be controlled by the state, but this does not happen. The illicit financial flows also fan the flames of conflict, as they allow arms to be traded with impunity. But they also leave African countries at a financial disadvantage and unable to meet their obligations towards their people. This is becoming an even bigger threat, as there is likely to be an increase in the intensity of conflicts brought about by environmental change, leading to people's lives becoming even more of a struggle as the access to water and land are affected. Illicit financial flows, readily available cheap but deadly small arms and light weapons, are likely to increase the risk of the outbreak of armed conflict, especially in those parts of the continent that are already suffering the consequences of these global processes more intensely than most regions. Climate policies, therefore, that are preemptive are necessary to prevent further food insecurity, further loss of life and conflict as a result of climate change. What can we do about this? One of the reasons that we have failed to end conflicts on the continent is because we continue to deal with the symptoms, but not the root causes. I know some people groaned when I mentioned colonialism as one of the causes of where we find ourselves today. However, as Cicero said, to be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain always a child. For what is the worth of human life unless it is woven into the life of our ancestors by the records of history? So we cannot leave the past behind if it remains unresolved and affects the current situation. Therefore, a different way is needed, one which has leadership in place that has a vision and that looks beyond its 4 or 5 year terms in government. Our leaders need to have foresight and develop policies better, because at the moment policies appear to be formulated without any thought for longevity or clarity of thought as to what we really want to achieve as a continent. This goes hand in hand with the lack of respect for institutions, the seeming disdain for developing and protecting them that the leadership on the continent currently displays. Integration needs to be accelerated through the African Continental Free Trade Area, like Minister Davis just spoke about. The regional economic communities and other instruments within the African Union architecture, because it is only through development that you can create the capacities that assist countries on the continent to overcome the peace and security challenges that they face. Women need to be included in peace and decision-making processes. They are affected differently and disproportionately by conflict than men. And to talk for them as if they do not have a voice only continues the cycle of unsustainable peace. The average African citizen is 19 years old. The youth are the future, but we continue to treat them as second-class citizens with no agency, when they are the ones most affected and who will be most affected by the decisions that are taken or not taken today. They also need a seat at the table. We need leaders and policies that put the people first, ones that recognize that Africa will only work if we work together, that recognizes that we are one people and have more in common than differences, a way that goes back to the founding principles of Pan-Africanism. Lastly, we need to re-evaluate what democracy means for us on the continent. Is it merely the holding of elections every 4 to 5 years? What is democracy when we have leadership that is not responsible or responsive to its citizens? What is democracy when people go to bed hungry? What is democracy when there is no safety or security? We need to rethink what we mean by democracy, because it cannot and should not just be about electing people. It should be about development, about putting people being able to put food on their tables and be able to feed their families. It should be about people having a sense of pride and dignity that they are contributing towards improving their lives, their families' lives, and those of the entire continent. It should be about development, about living a world that is better than the one we found. Democracy should be about having a leadership that knows that it is accountable to the people. Only then can we hope to deal with the underlying causes of conflict on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my dear sister, for this brilliant point. One of the things that we need at some point to discuss in terms of the conflicts that you are speaking to is the new concept that is taking root in some parts of Africa, what is called the emerging states in Africa. We have comrades from Twaga's Republic Party in the room. They are for restoration. You have in Nigeria, comrades who want to redraw the boundaries. It's happening. We also have southern Cameroons and the other areas across the Africa. So we need at some point to have this discussion. But linked to this also, I take your point on the borders, that we need to discuss it in the context of a reunion agenda. I'm born in Zimbabwe. My ancestors were born in Mpumalanga. I consider myself a South African, a Zimbabwean, so an African. So what does it mean? I have lots of brothers who are Mabena in Gwamhlanga. I'm a Mabena from Zimbabwe. We need to have this discussion. I know that the minister says his area load shedding is coming at 12, so we might lose him at 12. And Comrade Ian Bidos argues that the load shedding is caused by abandoning national planning and adopting neoliberal policies, which the minister also spoke to. So we invite Comrade Ian Bidos, an internationalist, to speak to us briefly for about 15 to 20 minutes. Comrade Bidos.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to start, I'm sorry to the last speaker, but by having a little bit of a disagreement with the last speaker. We are not living in a post-colonial society. We are not living in a post-colonial society. We're living in a neo-colonial society. Colonialism has only changed its form. It's not yet dead. I think, I made a list of some of the most prominent leaders taken away from us by colonialism, either sidelined or murdered, since the beginning of the colonial struggle. Dedan Kimathi, the leader of Mau Mau in Kenya, London Freedom Party, was hanged by the British in 1957. Then we look at Ahmed Ben Bella, who led the first major liberation movement, armed movement against the French in Algeria. After a couple of years, he was removed from power. Then we look at in Mali at Comrade Keita, who was the first president, but because he believed in progressive policies, Modibo Keita, he died in prison. We look at the greatest Pan-African leader of all time, Kwame Nkrumah, who was removed from power. We look more recently at Thomas Sankara. We look at the most horrible, the country with the most horrible history in the whole of Africa, in DRC. They murdered Patrice Lumumba. His successor in the liberation struggle, Pierre Mulele, was butchered while still alive after trying to make an agreement with the imperialist puppet, Mobutu Sese Seko. And then again, the next president who tried to do something in DRC, Laurent Kabila, was murdered. Again, if you come down to Southern Africa, what happened in my country, in Zimbabwe? They sidelined Joshua Nkomo and they killed the ZANU commander who was willing to do a deal to let the Patriotic Front standers won, Josiah Tongogara. And here they killed Chris Hani. Here in South Africa they killed Chris Hani because they didn't want him to be the next president after Mandela. And there's a reason for all of this. There's a reason for all of this. And it's called the neo-colonial agenda. How did the neo-colonial agenda start? Yes, it started where I started with the armed conflicts in Algeria and in Kenya. The imperialists, the major imperialist powers, Britain and France, recognized they couldn't carry on in the same way. They couldn't just carry on with direct colonialism. So they adopted the policy of neo-colonialism by the late 1950s. Yes, brother, we put you in prison. We stopped you from being the leader. Now you can be the president. You can have your national flag, the national anthem. We will control your economy and we'll give you a nice 10% on all our deals so you'll live in luxury. And that's what has happened in Africa. When we come down to South Africa and Zimbabwe, what happened? First of all, let's get rid of one misconception, which is very common. We've got the concept that the liberation struggle in Zimbabwe and the liberation struggle in South Africa were anti-imperialist struggles. They were not. They were not. The Rhodesians and the Boers are not the imperialists. The imperialists live in London, they live in Paris, and they live in Washington. Those are the imperialists. By the time they came down to southern Africa, it was obvious that the white racist settler regimes could not last. They could not last. So what they wanted those settler regimes to do, they wanted them to give way to, like the rest of Africa, to black governments which would toe the line. And of course, the Rhodesians and the Boers said, no, we're not relinquishing power. But they had to make sure that in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe and South Africa, that they removed those leaders who would create economies which were independent of their control. And they did that very effectively. They did that very effectively. And like I spoke to our chair earlier on, and yes, I said, load shedding is precisely because of the neoliberal and neo-colonial agenda. Because neo-colonialism in around about 1980 was actually added to by neoliberalism, which has badly affected the whole world. What does neoliberalism say? Everybody must become an entrepreneur. Now, before 1980, I would probably have had to look in a dictionary to find what that meant. But now all our children are being taught to become entrepreneurs. They've got no skills. In South Africa, in practical terms, we've got a continuation of Bantu education, where we've got so many children who are illiterate and innumerate. They can't even work in a shop because they don't know how to change money or how to... They can't. Why? Because of the education system, which is geared not for production. Yes. And production is the issue across Africa. And I'm very happy about some of the things that Rob Davis said. Now, before you can get production, you need electricity. You need electricity. If we look at the Soviet Union, people, oh no, that happened a long time ago. But what did the Soviet Union do under Lenin? The Russian Revolution happened in 1917, the seizure of power by the Bolsheviks. But they had a civil war which lasted till 1922 after that. By 1920, although it hadn't completely finished, Lenin said we have to electrify the whole country. He got a guy called Khrushchevsky, who was an electrical engineer. So from 1920 they started to electrify. Now you're looking at the country the size of the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. They electrified the country within 12 years. By 1932, the first phase was finished. By 1941, when the Nazis invaded, they tripled that production capacity. Why can't we do the same? What is wrong with us? It's because we were told that we don't need state planning. In 1996, South Africa adopted the GEAR program, so-called Growth, Employment and Reconstruction. And what happened? Thabo Mbeki told us straight, yeah, we've got enough electricity, Yet we were supplying electricity to the African population which hadn't had it before, which was very good. But the way that the economy was organized was along neoliberal lines. And if you want to read Frantz Fanon, he actually says that in 1961, he says that when African countries, and he talked about the African elite, he talked about people only having an approximate bookish idea of the economy. And what did we do in South Africa and in Zimbabwe? We got neoliberal academics. Oh, these are experts in economics. We didn't look at what kind of economics. They're expert in economics. And there we had Trevor Manuel in South Africa, and we had Bernard Chidzero, who was trained by the World Bank, the IMF, in Zimbabwe. And it was even more catastrophic in Zimbabwe because we had a strong economy bequeathed to us by the Rhodesians. And this is where we've got this very interesting problem, because the Rhodesians, in their own peculiar way, were anti-imperialist because they didn't want to adopt the neo-colonial agenda. And if I'm 75 now, so I read some of those Soviet handbooks for African economists during the 60s. What did those handbooks say? They said, don't try to develop socialism too early in Africa, but develop economies which are independent, where the commanding heights of the economy are government owned or controlled. And there's only one country I know that actually did that, and that was Rhodesia. Except that they didn't do it for the majority, they did it to perpetuate, or to try to perpetuate, the rule of the white minority. And all during the 80s, what you bought in Zimbabwe, even after the Zimbabwe became free of direct colonial rule, what you bought in Zimbabwe was made in Zimbabwe by and large. We had economic independence. And that was not destroyed by the Rhodesians, that was destroyed by the ZANU-PF government, which adopted the ESAP, Economic Structural Adjustment Policy, just the same as the GEAR policy. They adopted that policy in 1991. Free trade. We started importing instead of exporting. Our economy went down. And we had black economic empowerment, or indigenous empowerment in Zimbabwe. What does that mean to the majority of the African people in either country? What does that mean? It means that the black elite is being looked after, and for the most part, the black elite are not even real capitalists. What's the difference? A real capitalist will exploit the workers, will set up a factory and put in machinery, the workers will come to work, and continuously the capitalist will exploit the labour power of the workers. He'll pay them, every week they come back, and in the end he's making quite a big profit. What do the majority of our African capitalists do? They loot. We call them the parasitic black bourgeoisie. And I know the South African Communist Party doesn't like to use the word black, but they say, I'm black, I'm formerly, before this I was sidelined, or what are the words that they use. But what do we see here in South Africa? I'm a builder by trade. I've worked in the construction industry for 45 years. Now, when I came into South Africa from Zimbabwe in 2008, after the collapse of the economy there, I saw what was happening in the building industry. And this is what's called black economic empowerment. Right. Typically, in the old days, a building worker, carpenter, bricklayer, electrician, whatever, would work for, let's say, Murray Roberts, a big white-owned company. But he would be a member of the trade union, and he would have certain rights as a worker. What does black economic empowerment mean to him? It means now that a subcontract is given to an ANC member who knows nothing about construction, and that ANC member will then give subcontract again to a Zimbabwean or a Mozambican who does know construction. But what does that do to the worker? First of all, he's got no job security. He has to, instead of paying just his white boss, he now has to pay his black South African boss and his Zimbabwean boss before he gets the pittance at the end of the day. And it's destroyed the trade union movement. This is the reality of so-called black economic empowerment. It's disempowered the majority of the people of South Africa and of Zimbabwe. It's disempowered them, it hasn't empowered them. It's empowered an elite, for the most part, which doesn't understand production. And Comrade Rob was exactly right in saying production is central. And we cannot have production without electricity in the modern world. State planning comes first. And by the way, in terms of management, the great Lenin, please, if you can get hold of it online, write it down. Left-wing childishness and the petty bourgeois mentality. The question of management is of vital importance. By the way, the first two sections deal with are not relevant. It's the last three sections, the 5 sections. After the revolution, the Bolshevik government nationalized all industries, but it kept the same management. And some of the so-called left communists were saying, we must get rid of these old bourgeois managers and put our guys there. And what did Lenin say? Rubbish. You don't know how to manage a factory. The ownership of the factories had become national. It wasn't going to be capitalist. But the management, yes, they still kept the old management because they knew what they were doing. Then they put, they would put a political commissar, they put the workers' committee to oversee that management. So they couldn't do just what they wanted. And they made sure the young guys were there to understudy the old guys. What do we get in Africa? Why are we told that nationalization doesn't work? Because instead of putting experienced management, which may be white, it may be Indian, it may be Zimbabwean, it may be Russian, it may be Chinese, instead of putting experienced management and putting our young people to study it, we put the nieces and nephews and brothers of politicians who loot for their families. They don't know what they're doing, and they loot. And what is happening to our children when if they go to university? Very few of them are doing practical subjects. Very few of them are becoming engineers. We have the problem of water as well. How many African water engineers have we got? Comrade Solly Mapaila, at the set time they were talking about land reform, which I thoroughly agree with. I worked with Chenjerai Hundri in Zimbabwe in terms of land reform in Zimbabwe. I believe in land reform. But Solly, Comrade Solly, visited agricultural colleges in South Africa at the time there was a lot of talk about land reform. And by the way, land reform is not mainly about agriculture, it's mainly about what's under the ground. But anyway, this agricultural colleges, what do you find there? White South Africans, and where there were blacks, there were mainly Zimbabweans and Mozambicans. So now you want to take over agricultural land which you don't know how to use. So the question of educating our children from young, even to know basic mathematics, to become literate, that is very, very important. And then as they go up, we've got a skill shortage in South Africa. Those who are not maybe sent to university, we want them to become bricklayers and carpenters and electricians, welders, tailors, shoemakers. It's not happening. So when I hear of a certain minister recently suggesting that once we get rid of all the foreigners, we'll create 2 million jobs. Has he got any idea of political economy and how an economy works? No idea whatsoever. So what we have to get back to is national planning. The last thing I want to say is this. We have the BRICS summit here in South Africa in August. BRICS is going to give us a window of opportunity. We're going to escape from the clutches of US terrorism, of US control. You know, we've got AFRICOM, Africa Command here in Africa. They created major war in Congo. They backed Uganda and Rwanda to invade Congo with the biggest war in Africa ever. And yeah, you talk about conflict in Africa. 80 to 90% of the conflict is caused by US intervention. And then we had the destruction of Libya. By the way, the leader of that was the first African-American president. What happened after the destruction of Libya? It was genocide against black Libyans and reintroduction of the slave trade. Thank you very much, black Americans. So, what we have to do now, the defeat of NATO, which is happening now on the battlefields in Ukraine, and the downgrading the US dollar. By the end of this year, the US dollar will probably be toilet paper, and if not the end of this year, by the end of next year. The US dollar is going down, it will no longer be the major trading currency. So, what's going to happen now is that we will get a window of opportunity. Look, the Chinese are far from perfect. We've had problems with them in Zimbabwe, but government to government will do much better deals than the West. And going back to load shedding, why do we have to go to the white minority to, I'm just finishing, to put solar panels? Why can't the South African government and the Zimbabwean government do deals with China and say, we want solar panel factories? Why can't that be done through ESCOM? What's wrong with the thinking? So, we've got a window of opportunity, but it won't be done for us, and this is where my final word. Each and every country in Africa needs a national development plan. If we don't have national planning, we cannot just move away from the West to China and Russia and think everything will be all right. It's our responsibility in Africa to have state planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Comrade Ian Bidos. He is our commissar. So when a commissar speaks, they will not conclude. I'm not sure if the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Swaziland is here. I didn't see when they entered the conference. Okay, he's not here. Is there a comrade from the ANC? Comrade Nandipa from the ANC is not here. Okay. Have comrades from Kosato arrived? Do you have a comrade from Kosato here? Okay. We welcome Comrade Fundi Nzimande. She's an author. I see she's carrying a bag. I will assume that they are books. So it's important that while we're having this discussion, there's a table outside for registration. You might want to display your books there so that when we exit this hall, comrades can have a look into your books. Then when we have lunch, you can then be providing them with those books. Comrades, there is a conflict that is ongoing in Sudan. As we celebrate Africa Day today, I've said earlier on that in 2013, the African Union adopted the theme Silencing the Guns in Africa. Guns are getting louder in Africa. We see what is happening in Mozambique. We see what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're talking about it with Comrade Sage yesterday. We see the conflict in Sudan. We've been recording videos about what is happening in Sudan. We have Dr. Elgoni, Dr. Abdul Karim Elgoni. He has been working in Lesotho. He is a medical specialist as an advisor to the Minister of Health, but is also part of the people that are trying to bring peace in Sudan. We've invited him to come and speak to us for about 15 to 20 minutes. And I forgot earlier on to welcome those that are following us on our social media platforms. We thank you. Let's keep following. Dr. Elgon, we give you about 20 minutes to explain to us what is happening in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Madena. Greetings, everyone.
May I also request that we keep our phones silent, please. Let's not have a phone ringing. Just take out your phone and put it on silent. Thanks.
I'm really happy that today we are together here celebrating Africa Day. And I really congratulate the African Diaspora Forum for annually and for the last maybe 10 years annually celebrating the Africa Day. This is something that we need, and we need to focus on it so that we can bring Africa together. And I'm also happy about the presentation that was done earlier by Dr. Davis, the previous Minister of Trade, trying to focus the possibilities that can happen in Africa if we put our resources together. We know Africa is rich and has expertise, not only within Africa, but also within the diaspora. And if we put hands together within Africa and the diaspora, a lot of things could happen. I am happy to be presenting to you today something about my country, Sudan. And whatever I wanted to share with you, we hope that we get lessons from what's happening in Sudan so that we don't allow it to happen in other African countries. Until 1973, the Sudanese pound was equal to 3.3 US dollars. And then we had a military coup. Jafar Nimeri was the military dictator in Sudan, and during his time, the Sudanese pounds lost its power. But until 1984, the Sudanese revolted against Nimeri, and they had a transitional government for 2 years, and then they had a free and fair election that brought the late Sadiq al-Mahdi to power. His party was the winning party. And he ruled from 1986 to 1989. There was 1 year remaining where the second elections would happen, and the Sudanese people would have seen what parties have done, and they will choose their favorite one that has the better plans. But unfortunately, the military were unhappy about this. So they had a coup in 1989. And hundreds of people were taken to security jails, including myself. I stayed 7 months in jail, security jails. And this is how I ended in Southern Africa. They confiscated my passport, and I got a United Nations volunteer job with United Nations as the UN medical officer in Lesotho. And when I came here, I fell in love with Southern Africa, and this is here. Still, I am here. Just to give you an example, when the military were in Sudan, the 1 Sudanese pound was equal to, the $1 was equal to 6 Sudanese pounds. In June 1889. Today, $1 is equal to 6,000 Sudanese pounds. And this is why the discussion of Dr. Davis about the Pan-African trade is very important for all of us. The military coup of al-Bashir and the Muslim Brotherhood in 1989 was one of the great nightmares in Sudanese history, because it did not only destroy the economy, it destroyed the social structures of Sudan, it brought rivalry between the army, the Sudanese army, and the people. The Sudanese army in 30 years has killed thousands. All of them are Sudanese citizens. Actually, to me, the Sudanese army is the only army that was trained to kill its citizens. It has never protected the country, because as we speak, there are 3 areas in Sudan that are occupied by neighboring countries. But that is not the only problem. The problem is that corruption, loss of human resources. When the military decided to bring people by loyalty. So if you are not loyal to them, you lose the job. And within 1 year, almost 50% of the public sector professionals lost their jobs. And millions of Sudanese have to leave the country, looking for ways of how to survive and how to keep their families alive. And this affected especially the youth and the new university graduates. Thousands of them have to leave Sudan. And during this struggle to live, many of them died either in the Libyan desert or in the Mediterranean Sea. At the same time, the movement against the military government in Sudan has not stopped. Myself being here, we are interconnected with Sudanese all over the world to try to do how can we resist this country, how can we, and you remember when al-Bashir came here, how the work that we have been doing made him run away with his tail between his legs. Most of this is part of the Sudanese who are in the diaspora trying to resist dictatorship in Africa, because we know dictatorship is not allowing Africa to move forward. Then it was too much for the Southern Sudanese to continue in a military government. And this is how South Sudan seceded. And we had now 2 countries, 2 Sudans instead of 1 Sudan for more than 50 years. This gives you an indication of how dictatorship and military rule can do to an African country. But not all the South have seceded, but they were not satisfied yet. They started a war in Darfur that have killed more than 300,000 people in Darfur and have made millions either displaced or refugees. Of course, when you have insecurity, production stops, investment stops, and the bad economy not affects the government only, it affects everyone. And the Sudanese went from the richest country in Africa in 1960s to one of the poorest countries in Africa in the 2000s because of what has happened in Sudan. But the problem is this, as my colleague from Zimbabwe have said it earlier, that it is the elite who are benefiting from situations like this. the elite wanted to keep the privilege they have had from the military regimes, so the resistance was too much, the rebellion is all over the country, the army cannot manage it alone, they decided to create militias to fight on their behalf. And those militias were given a lot of resources to fight their own people. They were created on tribal basis first, so that one tribe will kill the other tribe. But then, as things move forward, they found that they cannot continue like this. They tried to legalize those militias. So they created a military arm of the army through the law. They went to parliament, they enacted a law that was signed by the president of the country, creating what is called the Rapid Support Forces as an arm of the military. And they said it is not different because Russia has that force, America has that force, all European countries has other forces, Israel has other forces that support the national army. And they gave these rapid support forces a sort of a legality. So whenever al-Bashir speaks of the army, he will say the army and the rapid support forces. Whoever speaks will speak as of the Sudanese army as two arms, the military and the rapid support forces, and have been working hand in hand all those years, until we had our youth who decided, instead of dying in the desert and in the Mediterranean, that they will make the revolution boil. And it boiled up in 2018, and we overthrew al-Bashir. And we brought in a civilian government. But because of the grip of the military on everything in Sudan, the universities as military universities, the companies are military companies, everything actually is in the grip of that. We couldn't have a civilian government alone. We have to do a way of managing it together for a transition between the civilian and the military until we have elections. But immediately when they felt that elections are going to happen, they had the first military coup in October 2021. And they took the prime minister of the civilian government to security jails and all his ministers, and they succeeded in bringing in a full military rule again back. But during this time, the rapid support forces found that their fortunes will be better if they sided with the civilians. So the rapid support force general said, I am no longer supporting a military government in Sudan. I am in full support of the civilian rule, and let us go for civilian rule. Immediately when he said this, the military was unhappy about those statements. And a division started happening between the two army, generals. And when this happened, the army generals decided to take it to the second coup, which was last month. In April last month, they had their second coup, where they attacked the military forces of their brother and friend and whatever you can call it, the rapid support forces. And we went into war. This war, in Khartoum alone, I think we lost more than 1,000 civilians. I am counting civilians, we are not counting military. Military, maybe more than 20 or 30,000 have died during this time, in 1 month. And people are counting. As I am standing here, maybe some are dying in Sudan. And we regret that very badly, especially civilians. Not only this, actually more than 1 million Sudanese are either displaced or are refugees in Egypt or Saudi Arabia or the other neighboring countries like Chad and the Central African Republic. So this dilemma, this insecurity, when we think of the presentation, the first presentation, insecurity is the best enemy of poverty. Because when there is insecurity, there is no production. I want just to give you an example. Hamdok, when he presented his first budget, he said openly, my citizens, it is true I am the Prime Minister, but I have to give you facts. My government is in charge of only 12% of the GDP of Sudan. 88% of GDP of Sudan is controlled by the military companies. And my first job to do is to see how can I move the ownership of those military companies to be controlled by the national budget, national treasury. He was unable to do this because the military were adamant no one is going to control the companies that they have been running for the last 30 years. This is the dilemma we are in. The Sudanese are now fighting against two military. The military of Sudan that has been trained that they have to rule for life. When you go to the military school, you are trained. You are the coming leader of Sudan. And with the support forces, which is a militia that is legalized. It's legal. And then we have to choose between which is legal, but which is supporting the transition to a civilian rule. And we, the Sudanese, are put by the choice of those two military arms that are fighting on the ground and from the sky, and we don't know what to do. When I was a child, where my grandmother used to tell me a story of a bird. That bird gives only one egg a year. And she says that egg, if you take it, it will kill your father. If you don't take it, it will kill your mother. So it is called the egg of the bird in Kititi. The bird is called Kititi. We haven't seen this bird. But anyway, the thing is like this. If you take it, it kills your mother. If you don't take it, it kills your father. So both decisions are difficult for us. So now as Sudanese, if we support the army, we are supporting a destruction of Sudan because this is a tried and tested army that have destroyed the country. And if we said we support the rapid support forces, we know what we are getting. And the decision is difficult. Anyway, to cut a story short, 2 days ago, we had a short ceasefire, a 1-week ceasefire, that was done by our neighbors, the Saudis and the Americans. It is not holding, but anyway, we are not distressed because there were more than 10 ceasefires before that did not hold. But at least this one is not as violent as the previous ones, and we hope that maybe in a week it will hold. And if it holds, Sudan is very rich. Rich in its people. There are millions of Sudanese graduates who are working all over the world, expatriates. There are thousands of Sudanese within Sudan. Sudan has a lot of resources. The most important resource we have is water, where we have the blue and the white Nile. We have the river Nile. We have hundreds of tributaries of those two rivers. Agriculture is the main thing that we will focus on. Food is needed by everyone, and this will be the focus of our civilian government that we will expect will take over, hopefully, before the end of this year. And if we did that, we are following on the discussion that we have had this morning, that we will push towards the free African trade, because there will be a lot of good things for us, for Sudan and for neighboring countries. It is not only agriculture. We I want just to give you an example. I come from a rural, a nomadic tribe, and we are called the Bagara. Bagara means the cattle herders. We are about 2 million people, but we have more than 6 million heads of cattle. When I went to my chiefs and I said to them, Holland have only 2 million heads of cattle, but they are getting more than $50 billion out of those. We have 6 million heads of cattle, and we are paying our cattle through non-education, non-development. We are paying our cattle more than 2 billion a year, I estimate. So instead of our cattle paying us, like what is happening in Holland or happening in New Zealand, we are paying our cattle because we are following the cattle in a non-economic relationship. Women cannot get health and die, children cannot get health and dying, cannot get education, and this creates perpetual poverty. So for us as Sudanese, our best bet is for this war to end and for us to have a civilian government that allows exchange of power peacefully, that allows development, that allows investment, that allows Sudan to join hands with countries in Africa that would follow on the policies that will allow Pan-African trade and allow development of Africa, and that my children and grandchildren will never be standing here to try and tell you the war in Sudan is destroying us. I want my children and grandchildren to stand in front of people as an African wherever they go, in south or east or west or north, and say, we are proud Africans. Our Africa is completely different from the Africa that my father and grandfather have lived in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elgoni. I'm sure we now understand what is happening in South Sudan. They have a difficult decision to make, whether to support the Sudanese army or to support the other military wing. What we want as the African Diaspora Forum is peace in Africa, because whenever there is conflict, which my sister spoke to also earlier on, is that you start having migration. Migration, as I said earlier on, then becomes down south. And we see what is happening Desmond Refugee Center, where people sleep there trying to get asylum documents and refugee status. So this is why it's important for us as the African Diaspora Forum that there is peace in the continent, so that we speak about industrialization of the continent. We thank Chief Jubane for attending this seminar as the African Diaspora. As African Diaspora Forum, we work with the traditional leaders as part of building social cohesion in our communities. We are getting to the last speaker. Angazi izimthobi emoyo here. Kunembongi bengicabanga ukuthi a poet was supposed to come. I'm not sure if he finally came. I know we're now getting tired. Can you just stand you just a second? Just a second. Thank you. We can take a seat. We are getting to the last speaker. Then we open the discussion where we have comments, we have 10 questions before we break for lunch. We are honored to have Dr. Brown Maba from the Heritage and Research. He's a consultant. Unfortunately today, the chairperson of the African Diaspora Forum is not here because there's another event that is happening where the President of the Republic is speaking. We work every year with the Gauteng Department of Sports and the Arts. They recommended that Dr. Brown Maba, instead of going where the president is, he should come and grace our occasion. Some of our leaders in the ADF, they've gone to attend that event, and also some artists from the migrant community led by our very own MC Gwaza Gwaza, they've gone there. Dr. Maba, please. So sorry, I'm being told to say Wi-Fi. I'm told that if you need Wi-Fi, you go, the LED will assist you if you need to be connected, but let's just hear what the God said, so that you can disrupt it, then you can connect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mabena. Morning to everyone. Happy Africa Day. My name is Brown Maba. And my topic is going to flow from the main topic, the theme of the day, which is conflict and stability on the continent. Of course, the free trade in Africa, which was penned down in 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the map of Africa, if you put it in front of you on the table, you will realize that much as we have this particular dream about the free trade in Africa, which will benefit all of us, which will make the acquisition of goods to be easier and so on, and making trading to speak in one voice, you will realize that we have problems that are littered around Africa. And surely this is going to affect the whole thing, much as we have this particular vision. So I'm speaking from the topic itself and offering some suggestion of what we may have to do. For instance, if you look at the conflict in Africa, of course it comes from or spans from colonialism, which was imposed on us. We all know that. Africa is unstable today because of colonialism. Our economies are struggling to develop because of colonialism and so on. And for more, if you want to pick up some interesting aspects of how Europe underdeveloped Africa, you should read a book by Walter Rodney on how Europe underdeveloped Africa. There you'll pick up, this is something that you know, you'll pick up the important aspects of how the continent got destroyed as a result of colonialism. And we're actually reeling from the effects of colonialism to this day. But at the same time, there are other factors that are affecting the African continent and which may have impact negatively on this free trade agreement. Some of the things that are happening on the continent are things that we as Africans have created ourselves. We've actually shot ourselves in the foot. What do I mean by that? There were these countries that were to run, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, you name them, Tanzania and others. And our own leaders destroyed those countries. It's true. There's no reason why Mugabe overstayed to the point where the country is actually finished and ran down completely. If you look at Zaire, Zaire was actually destroyed completely by one person, Mobutu Sese Seko, the richest man in Africa. But the population of that particular country is extremely, extremely poor. We know that. The conflict that we have today, is as a result also, not only from colonialism, but also our own leaders, actually leading us to the wrong direction. In Sudan today, the conflict that we have today is attributed to the period of Sudan themselves. Everybody wants to run the country. The military wants to run the country. The paramilitary wants to run the country. It's all about power, and the country is just eating itself. How is this free Africa trade going to run under these circumstances? We have a problem. We're sitting on a very, very serious problem. Instead of trying to actually find a solution to our economic issues and so on, and make sure that we actually take ourselves out of poverty, our own leaders are fighting for power, for dominance, for control. You have corruption. South Africa today is in crisis. There's corruption. You know that. The infrastructure in South Africa is collapsing. And you can actually, when you speak to people who come from other African countries, they will tell you, you know, if South Africa collapses, then we're all gone, you know. Because South Africa has got a massive and strong infrastructure, and it is the strongest diamond that remains and so on. But the things that are happening today, from load shedding, that's part of the collapse of infrastructure. The trains are no longer working, and so on. Corruption is rife. You know, we're going south. And how in the world is this Africa trade going to succeed if there's no infrastructure to actually make sure that it works? You know, the transportation of goods, you know, either by air or rail or by road, is going to be affected, you know. All of a sudden in South Africa, there's just potholes everywhere. You get potholes incentive, you know. Yeah, it's terrible. We didn't expect it, you know. It's as if that particular pothole is a part-time pothole. When you come back tomorrow, you don't be there. You'll find it there, you know. So this will impact negatively on this aspect of free trade. You know, we're trying to move forward, but there's many problems that we have. Of course, and we come from also the situation of the Cold War. You know, you have your capitalist countries, and then you had your communist countries in Africa. You had Tanzania following the socialist route. You had Mozambique following that. You had Angola following that. And then the other countries, you know, following capitalist system. And by the time Tanzania, Angola, and Mozambique came out of the communist system or the socialist system, you know, it took them time to recover and, you know, moving towards capitalism and so on. You know. Zaire is another case, you know, because Mobutu Sese Seko was a puppet of the West there, you know, and even though he can claim to be, you know, anti-communism or anti-socialism and so on. But we know that he was a dictator and actually, you know, faced the resources of the country to his own benefit. I mean, he's one of the richest men in Africa, even if he's dead. So you had those things, those particular conflicts that are actually going to have an impact on African trade. And then you look at countries like Tanzania. But Tanzania, you know, Ujamaa failed. I mean, there's a lot of literature about why Ujamaa failed and so on and so forth. But by the time the country tried to move forward, you know, it was struggling to come out of it and so on. There's sources that you can read on Ujamaa. There's a book called Beyond Ujamaa and many others that you can read. But this crisis is creating problems for the future, for the rest of us in the African continent. And actually, we need to go beyond that to see what we can do in order to solve these particular issues. So the implications of the state of Africa impacts directly, you know, to this free trade area, you know, as penned down in 2018 by the four countries that actually signed for that. Moreover, the countries that didn't or do not want to be part of this, they themselves are creating problems for the rest of this vision, simply because, you know, if Nigeria, for instance, is not part of it, how do you transport goods from South Africa to Egypt, let's say by rail? If you know, probably have to go through Nigeria and so on, but Nigeria is not part of it. So that kind of situation causes a lot of conflict and problems for this particular vision. So this is very problematic. And of course, I've got some suggestions of how we can move forward. And some of the things that you guys are also thinking about. And one of the things that needs to be considered, or that we need to think about deeply, is, you know, African Union needs to be very effective in its work. You know, the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, when they sat down and worked towards the unity of Africa, they were serious about it because they realized, you know, we need to unite in Africa as Africans to work together and so on. But as I said to you, and as we all know, there's been a lot of things that have been happening which destabilize all that. Apartheid in South Africa, amongst other things, and all sorts of things, you know, freedom of Zimbabwe in 1980, you know, and so on. So the African Union really needs to a very instrumental tool in ensuring that these particular things that we want to drive are driven and are driven properly. Another aspect that needs to be considered for this African continental trade to work properly, we need stable democracies in our countries. If a country is not stable democratically and otherwise, nothing is going to move. I mean, as I said to you, all of a sudden with the conflict in Sudan, we didn't expect this to happen. Of course, there was a coup, al-Bashir was kicked out and so on and so on. And, you know, and suddenly the two people who kicked him out are now fighting amongst themselves. We are now going to have civilian rule in Sudan. By the time things stabilize 4 or 5 years down the line, Sudan would have lost its manpower, intellectuals, academics, entrepreneurs, business people would have left Sudan. It means Sudan will have to start all over the show. As you put it, already we have 2 Sudans. You know, we have the South Sudan and Sudan. You know, in the past we only had Sudan, but thanks to tribalism and ethnicity and so on, we now have 2 Sudans, South Sudan and Sudan. You know, so these particular aspects are problematic for our democracy. You know, we do not know what's going to happen in South Africa when it comes to elections 2024. It's a democratic country, and so on. But what if the ANC loses power next year and people are refusing to leave? And the army takes over the country, and now we have a conflict within a conflict. You know, it happened in Zimbabwe. Mugabe refused to leave, you know, and there was a round of elections and so on, and Changarai was now out in the cold, and later on was brought on back and so on. And so Zimbabwe is where it is today, simply because of these internal conflicts and so on. There is no stability in our countries, and it's affecting the politics of the stomach, you know, because this free trade Africa is meant to address the politics of the stomach, that we work collectively to actually maximize our power as Africans. We'll come together as one bloc and so on. So, the stability in our countries, you know, is very important. You know, up to so far, and in many ways, the country that has been fairly stable, democratic-wise, since 1960 is Botswana. The rest of us are actually, you know, unstable. You know, we have a coup there. You know, there's despots here and there, and so on and so on. Elections have been rigged, and so on and so on. And that, you know, affects the people on the ground. And of course, the saying is true that when 2 elephants fight, as is the case with Sudan, it is the grass that suffers. You know, the generals are fighting amongst themselves. It's the people that actually are bearing the brunt. So stability in these countries are very important. It is very important in order to have this free trade agreement to work properly. I mean, apart from this particular free trade agreement, you know, there cannot be a free flow of goods if there's conflict in the continent. You know, if Zimbabwe is at war, you know, how do you transport things from one country to another? You have to go through the borders of Zimbabwe or Lesotho and so on. You can't. You know, it becomes problematic. You know. And I also want to stress that in order for us to have a stable Africa, all citizens must be accountable to the government, irrespective of social status. It can't be that there can be one law for one section of the society and another law for another section of the society. We are all accountable to the government, and we're all supposed to be governed by the rules and laws of the country. You know, if there are people that cannot be arrested in the country, then who should be arrested on their behalf? And why should I be going to prison and so cannot go to prison? You know, so accountability by all citizens is very important, and that should actually apply across the board. What we need to work against as Africans is the issue of brain trade. As I've mentioned to you, we go to London, we go to the US, we go to Canada, we go to Australia and so on. That is where our economics are sitting. This is where our writers are based. This is where our academics live. You know, why should I live in Africa, which is unstable? You know, why should people remain in Sudan when the country is on fire, when the country is burning? When I can offer my skills in one of the universities in the US, so I can go to Harvard and so on and offer my skills there. Why should I remain in the country and watch as my children are killed? Or why should I remain there until I get killed? I pack my bags and I leave. You know. So the more our countries are stable, the better things will be for the Africa trade. You know, because all our intellectuals will come back and say, no, I want to serve the African continent. Things are peaceful now. As we speak now, if you're a Sudanese and you are planning to come back to Sudan, and you're sitting in the US, you say to yourself, I can't go there. Why should I go there? You remain in the US, you know, and in the end, you probably die in the US and you share and say, hey, we don't even know the Sudan anyway. We grew up in the US and we will remain there. I mean, we know of many exiles who never came back to South Africa because they were not certain what was going to happen post-1994. They remained in America, they remained in Sudan, I'm not in Sudan, they remained in Britain, they remained in other countries and so on. And when these old-timers and old-mothers died, when these old-timers and old-mothers died, their children had barely set foot in South Africa. They grew up in the US and they said, you know what, we can't go back there. The people that know South Africa and so on were these people. We've never been to South Africa and so on. We are Americans who remain in the US. That's why in the US you will find a Simelane or a Maba who's never been to South Africa, but has a surname that originates from South Africa. It's the parents that live there and the children never connected with South Africa and so on. So there just is no way, practically speaking, in which we can remain in this particular continent if the continent is on fire. You know, at the end of the day, a human being naturally protects his eye. But a human being will try to protect his eye first, and then will actually deal with the other situations. So that's the problem. The problems that we're facing are creating all these problems. We need to work against xenophobia, ethnicity, tribalism, and so on. That we need to fight against, comrades. We will all remember the xenophobic situation in South Africa that keeps on flaring up and so on. But I'll take you also back to the 80s, in which 3 or 4 times, we know the Ghana must go movement from Nigeria. Yes, in which Nigerians expelled the Ghanaians 3 or 4 times, thousands of them, to leave their country because they are cornering the economy, and so on and so on. We need to fight against that. That's very, very important. Look at the Pan-African Parliament today. It is paralyzed simply because we are divided along the lines of Francophone and Anglophone. You know, it's just not working for us. You know, we have internalized tribalism so much that we cannot live without it. You know, you'll find in South Africa a sticker written 100% Zulu. What's that? I mean, for God's sake, is there someone who can be 100% Zulu, 100% Venda? Nonsense. This is stereotypes and actually perpetrating tribalism in a big, big way. You know, you may not be aware of that, but it has an effect. You know, our history is very important. Teaching of African history in schools is very, very significant and important. You know, in order to build this particular continent. You know, for instance, you know, the history of the Jews. The Jews will put it into your head that we went through hell through the Hitler time. They have museums in place. They emphasize this history and so on. And we have come to know about it, but we know less about our own history and the importance of our history. For instance, not so many people, you may take it for granted, but there are many South Africans who don't understand that the Zimbabweans that live in the south, Abantu Baga, Lobengula, and Mzilikazi, come from South Africa 200 years ago. And they would say, but how come the Zimbabweans speak Zulu? And we say, but no, these people are people who ran away from Shaga. 200 years ago, they said, what? I'm saying, yes. And if you look at the textbooks that are used to teach isiZulu in Zimbabwe, it's not Ndebele, it's actual Zulu. You know. So our people don't know about this. Our people don't know about the Lozi people. The Lozi people who live in Zambia actually originated from South Africa in the area of Northwest. And they migrated to Zambia around 1835. And those people, if you speak Setswana, of course now their language is mixed, you know, it's low, it's a bit of Tswana and a bit of mixture of Zambian languages. But if you speak in Setswana, they'll say, speak, I can hear you. You know. So that's the kind of it that needs to be emphasized in order to bring about one Africa and so on. We're already moving towards a situation whereby Swahili is now going to be taught in many African countries and schools and so on. That's the direction that we have to be taking. You know, at least now we can sing in one voice, and we know where Swahili comes from. You know, the coastal line people from Tanzania and so on. And Nyagara said he wanted to do something about it, to actually spread the importance of Swahili, and it worked in Tanzania. And now that it's going to be taught in South African schools and in other countries, it's going to be adopted as well, Swahili. That's the direction we should be taking. And this will speak to the whole theme of African free trade. Remember, Swahili was the language of trade. Now, if you adopt Swahili as all Africans, this free trade that we're talking about will work easily because we'll be able to communicate in one or similar language. We'll have a sense of how this whole thing works and so on. And I want to say to you that in the end, in Africa we'll have one currency. In the end. And that will benefit this free trade arrangement. You know. And in the end, there will be a borderless Africa again. You know, it's not a joke. Before the Berlin Conference of 1884, in which Africa was divided, Gamina, Gawena, Gawena, there were no borders. There was a seamless movement of people and so on. The borderless Africa, it may not happen in our lifetime, will be forced upon us because of migrations and so on. You know, the more there's instability in Sudan, the more people are forced to move to the neighboring countries, Chad and so on. You cannot do anything but to accept those people. You know. The more there's conflict in Zimbabwe and people move, like 4 million Zimbabweans in South Africa, there's nothing you can do because these people are actually being forced to move. So a borderless Africa, whether we like it or not, will eventually be there, whether it's 200 years later and so on. But the starting point will be one currency, you know. That will be followed. Not in our lifetime. Borderless Africa. No, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mava. We are saying that isiNguni should be one of the main international languages in this region. I speak isiNdebele. My brothers in Gwamhlanga speak isiNdebele. We have the Xhosa in Zimbabwe, here in South Africa. We speak isiZulu. I studied isiZulu in Zimbabwe. No, thanks a lot for the presentation. But when you said communist state, socialist state, I saw communists raising their heads. because there's never been a communist state. We have not yet reached that society or that stage. We are now going to questions and comments. We give one person a minimum of 3 minutes, maximum of 3 minutes to speak. We have heard our presenters. Unfortunately, as I said earlier on, the former minister, Dr. Rob Davis, we had connected him from Cape Town. He is no longer with us now. His load shedding schedule went off at 12. So if you have questions from the presentation that former minister made, you can raise your questions. Our Secretary Dorothy is going to note them down. We will send those questions to him for him to respond. And then you can ask the presenters who are here. Also, we have the register that we are circulating. We'll want to continue having discussions with yourselves, so make sure that you write your name and the details in that register. With that there, we'll be moving around with the mic. The ADF is an organization of Africans and everyone. She is South African. I'm born in Zimbabwe, so do not say this is a migrant organization. Dorothy, our secretary, is South African. Moxine is South African. I'm a South African Zimbabwean as well. Let's see if you have questions. There's just
Mandla.
Where to?
Mandla.
Where to?
Yeah. Angazi ukuthi khona abantu la. Kodwa ngibabonile abanye abayikhulu zami. Nginezikhalo nje eziningi. I don't want to.
Sorry, if you were to introduce yourself, then you.
Okay. Thank you. I always forget that. Sanibonani comrades. My name is Fundin Zemande. I am a community activist and also a member of the Communist Party of South Africa. I used to be a leader of COSATU, and I was a commissioner as well of gender and a commissioner for employment equity. So, comrades, I just wanted to, I was touched by the last speaker. He moved me very much, and I think he said something about us communists. I'm not going to respond to that. I'll start with this first issue. He said that South Africa is collapsing. And I think it's true. What I don't understand is why that is happening and why we as citizens of South Africa are allowing it, because I think we are allowing it to happen. And I'm concerned not about the ANC, what it will do should it lose elections. I don't think that the ANC will be in a position to resist anything, because when the people of South Africa are tired of you, they will not gossip about you. You will know. And I also am very scared for the people who are leading currently, because I've started seeing on social media that some people who are leading ANC in certain parts of the country are being terrorized by communities. And I'm just using that word loosely, terrorized, because the truth is the ANC has let us down. I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed, because the ANC is an organization that was started in 1912. And it's an organization of previous generations of our families. But we cannot continue. Comrade, you are blocking me. But this is what is happening. You know, I love the ANC in terms of what the ANC stands for. But I've got issues with certain individuals in the ANC. So I will leave that there. I'm also concerned, comrade, because you talked about things that failed, that we tried to do as Africans in the post-colonialism, post-oppression. But you don't talk about, you don't analyze the issues. You just say a lot of things as if there's no context to why things happened in the particular way that they happened. So I'm really a little bit unhappy about that. And when you talk about stable democracies, in Africa, we know why our democracies become unstable. Even here, I believe that the reason we are having the challenges that we are having it's not because of Africa. It's because of foreign interference in South Africa. And people don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the people that we are giving as presents to be our leaders. So these are the problems that we have. And I'm very, I'm heart sore. I'm so heart sore. Because the comrade said something that I agree with. If South Africa comes to an end, because as far as I'm concerned, this country is going for civil war. This country is poised for civil war. And when that happens, it's going to affect the whole of Africa. And I used to tell my comrades when they are, okay, I won't call them comrades, the other people who say that migrants, this and that, I used to ask them, what will you do when South Africa implodes? Where will you go? Because probably you'll need to go somewhere. And now I'm standing here looking at what is happening in this country. I'm like, anytime now. It could be go time. So yeah, and the brain drain. Yeah, the brain drain, yeah, it's a real thing. But I also want to comment, also the people who did not come home after the struggle, they are ill-disciplined.
Yes.
Simple and straightforward, ill-disciplined. Because they should have come here and contributed.
And the discipline cater, like my comrade Fund, will respect time.
I'm happy about everything that we have said about Swahili and borderless Africa, because that's what we are thinking.
Thank you. Please, let's
Good morning, everyone. I don't know if it's morning or it's already afternoon. My name is Mr. Biwacha from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think each and everyone who has spoken here has mentioned about me and the people who are behind me. I'm not here to celebrate Africa Day because there's nothing to celebrate. We are here to talk about conflict and war. I was going to be invited to go where the president is going to for celebration. I said, I cannot go to celebrate because this is Africa. Africa Day means it's a day intended to celebrate and acknowledge the success of the organization of African unity. Are we united? From its creation on the May 25, 1963 in the fight against colonialism and apartheid, as well as the progress that Africa has made. Have we made any progress since so far? We are here to talk about conflict and war. In my country, there are both conflict and war, which were imposed by imperialism.
Yes.
So we talk about interstate war, intra-state war, imperialism, and we also talk about international war that the West has created in Africa so that we should not be united. And we are here talking about free trade. I wish the former minister was here. I was going to talk about that. And my comrade, please, thank you for mentioning that if South Africa collapses, all of us, we are down. All our eyes were in South Africa because that was the most industrialized country in Africa. But what the African Union did could not support South Africa. For South Africa to stand so that other countries should benefit from South Africa. Even though the West is trying to use South Africa to colonize other African countries, but they didn't make it. So if we can see that in that angle, we will see that South Africa has lost so many things. When we're talking about unemployment, it started when South Africa stopped manufacturing. I am a businessman.
You have a minute, comrade.
Thank you. I know we are communists. You want to save your time. Okay. We talk about South Africa because that's where I'm living now. And how can the African Union support South Africa to save those industries to keep on functioning? When South Africa stopped functioning, the industry in South Africa stopped functioning. That's why unemployment started. As a businessman, when I go and look for this one and this in each and every company, they tell me that wait after 5 to 6 weeks. And when I calculate after 5 to 6 weeks, I am already in China. I bought those things. 4 weeks, they are here in Durban. So it means these people are importing these things from China. And now, if they are importing now in China, those people who are working and on the job, what would they do? Today we are looking at McDonald's implementing self-service, and we are still keeping quiet. In my country, we are talking about conflict and war.
Thank you, comrade.
Thank you. Let me finish this one. Our neighbors are fighting against us. And here is MONUSCO, which is the mission, United Mission, that has been in the country since 1999 to protect us. But since 1999, we know what United Nations can stand for. Did they do their job?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you for cutting me off.
Let's finish this side, then we'll come here. We'll come this side. Let's finish this side. 3 minutes each, comrades.
Good afternoon, Salona. Angivuma benza khuluma in all languages. Kodwa ngilindewela ngithi. Benza awusheni, macheroni, madekwana, Mariana. Just trying to say it's an African day that we are trying to talk about. I'll mention only one thing that Comrade Bidos mentioned, which I have identified, as a major problem for us as Africans. He mentioned Bantu education.
Yes.
Our education system is so bankrupt ideologically. It doesn't give our kids a leverage when they go forward. What we are doing now, we are producing people who can read A, B, C, D, E, or write a theory. We have got no way the government has invested in overhauling the education system just like the Chinese and Japanese, so that at least our kids can be skilled, so that coming in the future they don't have to go and look for an investor. We are talking about Africa innovation coming together. But my question is, do we have the people with the expertise and skills in the current generations? Because the generation that is speaking now, their time is about to come to an end.
Amen.
This generation that you're speaking now here, your time has come to an end. The children who are sitting in conflict countries now, if they have to be replanted back to where they come from, what are they going to go back with? You won't have technocrats, you're not going to have educationists, you're not going to have anything. So our governments are only investing in education so that at least we can't be going slaves to other people. I'm coming from Zimbabwe. I've visited some of the provinces. I'm not going to talk about the conflicts that are happening there, but I'm looking at what the government should be doing. In Zimbabwe, there's no infrastructure. If one other country is going to go and trade with Zimbabwe, in a distance whereby you're supposed to travel 30 minutes, let's say in a proper government, in a proper infrastructure, you spend about 8 hours in the road. So how is Africa going to address that if the people internally are failing to do it? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a comrade there. You can speak when you give.
I will not waste time because it seems you're tapping into my mind. Comrade Ian, I think you have done very well as a commissar because Comrade Mutini just said what was in my mind. What is to be done? I think then the overhaul of the pedagogical system, the entire education system of Africans is very necessary at the most elementary level. When a child starts to learn anything, they must learn how to produce. We are failing to produce. And this is the core of all our issues. So I will not dilute what he has said, because at the core, that is where we must focus on in overhauling our entire learning process and how to produce. Then Dr. Maba, I think we will need to sit down. I have a clique of communists here that really need to tackle you a bit. So I'll hand over to another comrade.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kir is my name, and I'm going to speak as a South African that I am. And I think the problem is that we are not patriotic as Africans. This is the challenge we face as Africans. We are not proud to be Africans ourselves. We want to get our education from the Americans, from the Europeans, from the British. We want to go there, and that is the education that is being imposed upon our children. That is the education that is being imposed upon us. We go to our educational institutions, then we expect to learn of our rich African history, but it has been diluted by an American or a British system. We were not only colonialized, we found ourselves imperialized. We find that the French took our resources. That's why we can speak the language. We speak English today. We are proud to speak the English language of the Queen, but we are not reminded that she colonialized us. Our African people speak the French language, but we forget it was the French who imperialized our people. They did not only imperialize us, they stole our resources. That's why our economies are collapsing. It is not collapsing because as Africans we are fighting one another. It is collapsing because it is owned by them. They own our lands, and they don't only own our lands, they own our governments. Whether it is South Africa, whether it is the Mbekis, the Zumas, whoever you want to claim in this country, they own our governments, they dictate our elections, and that is where our problem lies. Africans must rise. Africans must rise and take ownership of the land. Only when they will take ownership of the land and take ownership of the country and teach their children that we are Africans first. Yes. That we are Africans first. I am not a Zulu first. I'm not whatever culture I come from first. I'm an African, and I must be proud to be African. And I am calling on the intelligence, and I always call it the intelligence that tap into our systems and our discussions. Listen proudly. There's a young generation coming up that's going to do away with politicians, and they're going to rise and take back our land and our streets. Thank you.
Then you pass it to him once you are done.
Is it afternoon already?
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Dawood Rwandlovu. Ngizalwa uMavilakazi. Ozalwa uShandu kaNdaba. I won't take long. There's a story that is very famous of a character called Solomon. It comes in many religious scriptures. When Solomon decided to migrate, he went into a land and he had a bird called the hoopoe bird. And this bird was the bird that was actually the connection of the time, the cell phone of the time. Go and check what is happening there and all of that. And this bird, when it flew away, it came back. Solomon was not very happy because it went missing. But then it came back with the news to say, I saw something fascinating. I saw a lady that was actually leading the people. She was the queen of Sheba. And this lady, she's the one who is in charge of everything in the land. Then Solomon wrote a letter to this lady inviting her to his system, his belief.
Now the lady receives the letter, long story short, and she opens the letter in front of the entourage, in front of the ministers, and say, "Ministers, I received the letter from a new guy that came through into our lands, and is inviting me to worship his God. What do you think?" They said, "No, you are our queen. Let's listen to what you have to say." Then the queen says, "I have one fear." This is the story that comes, this answer comes in the scripture, in the Quran, that says, "I have one fear. The fear is that in al-muluka idha dakhala qarya, when kingship, when the kingdom comes into a people, it comes into a city, afsaduha, they come and corrupt the land. And after, what do? وَجَعَلُوا عَيِّزَّةَ أَهْلِهَا أَضِلَّةً. What they do, they then denigrate and disrespect the leaders of the people of the land. My cry is this: we have, whether we like it or not, we have colonial borders. Whenever people come to South Africa in my land, they disrespect our culture, they denigrate our heritage, they look down upon us. Our very Africans, we need to close the door and talk as Africans, and let alone the Europeans. Because those Europeans, whether it be the French or the English, they have taught us to look down upon one another. Whether you speak French, you look down upon the person that speaks English. This is the problem that we have. Keep our people uneducated, keep them poor, keep them uneducated, keep them poor, and keep them in constant fear of these wars. And they will vote for you all of the time. And this is the system that is used. Our African brothers, let us respect one another. Respect our lobola when we say pay lobola. Don't say this is nonsense. This is the land in which you have come through, and you signed whatever that you signed to say you will respect the land. Come and respect us. Let us lead you, don't lead us. Thank you.
Thank you. I gave you 4 minutes because I only sent you the invitation yesterday afternoon.
School, and my question is directed to both speakers, Prof. or the communist. Prof, if my memory serves me well, Eurozone took about 50 years to come into reality. Now there is a talk now in the corridors about the BRICS currency, to all the BRICS countries. So now, how is that going to be possible in terms of merging all these economies of scales in our continent? Yet now our politicians, our AU, Pan-African Parliament is lagging behind. You know, we don't know what are they talking about. Yet our economy, you know, it's leaving our shores. We talk of Africa Vision 2063. What do we do now, between now and 2063? Yet all the products that are building economy globally coming from our shores. Our oil from Nigeria has been cleansed in Europe, yet people are in abject poverty. So what's wrong with us? What's wrong with us? Our system of education, why don't we change it? Yeah, theorizing. So why don't we change radically? And then say, no, the buck stops right here. I think Rwanda has started so well by producing their own cell phone. So why don't we do the same in South Africa? Because all, and other countries, Ghana, and then, you know, Amazonia, the oil, Francophone, the moment we're fighting, they're taking our resources. So what is wrong? What is wrong with us? Then say, now we're taking action. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go. Okay. My time is hitting me. We need to go for lunch. Yes.
Sanibonani. Yeah, no, igama lami nguKhanyisani wakaVilakazi. Oh, Masukuma. Okay. Greeting everyone. You know, my name is Kanisan Vilagazi, so I would like to apologize for coming late. However, I managed to get some of the key speakers. I want to say I'm partially covered by the speakers who spoke before me. Comrade Mabena, I'm not sure what after all this input and constructive ideas going forward, are they going to materialize? Because now we need to work on it a little. Because I think this is a one-year event where we celebrate this day. So I want to believe that next year there will be at least maybe % of a progress on what is being put before us or on our disposal. Again, Commissar, I am we have a challenge of what you call our parliament, a Pan-African parliament. My brother here, Dr. Brown, he alluded that we have, I'm not sure, skive or something, puppet. He used that word, the puppet, when he refers to Maputo Suseb. It's not only him. It might take us another millennium for Africa to be conquered. I don't want to lie to you. We have what you call money queen. You know money queen? That doll that they dress for the clothing when they advertise. It's our leaders. Yeah, it's our leaders. We cannot shy away from that. So mine, Comrade Mabena, please next year, if we want to do something, at least let's have that progress. See, based on what is being articulated today, what is the progress in 2024? My SACP activist, I want to assure the rest of the audience here, South Africa will never collapse. I want to assure you, South Africa will never collapse. ANC is put, and then people will come that we entrust. That's it. We cannot be living in fear because of their internal squabbles. Some of us will know about it. Exactly what these guys are doing, they're displaying what you call their dirty linens on our expense. Next year we're going there, we're going to use our conscience. Yeah. And then they must move out, and then we'll see who we deem fit to run the affairs of this country.
Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute. Oh, okay, a few seconds. I'm sorry. Yeah. Few seconds. In the challenge of this Africa Diaspora, there's Africa Diaspora SA, there's Africa Diaspora. So I'm not sure if you can balance me there. This one is directed to you.
Okay, thank you. Let's try to be brief, comrades. Let's start there at the corner. We'll come down.
Thank you very much. My name is Velile Moyo from Matebele land, Zimbabwe, from Twaras. I'll just highlight a few things here. Maybe first appreciating the African Diaspora Forum. I have never seen it in this light, but I think I like the engagements that I hear coming from. Maybe let me say, as we are all seated here, probably we are focusing on the self-determination of Africa as a continent, not necessarily castigating the whole global world, but in a way to look at ourselves in the picture of the whole globe and where we belong and what we can do for the emancipation of Africa. I think a lot of things have been said here. I was touched also from the Sudan point of view. If we look at it from how that has been influenced outside of Sudan to create a scenario that they are actually going through.
maybe let me just get to the point and say, when we are looking at Africa as a whole and our problems, you will discover that the problems that we have, most probably do not have solutions. Let me just put an example. When we wrote a letter to the African Court regarding human rights abuses in Zimbabwe, and also the issue of the genocide that was perpetrated by the government of Zimbabwe to the people of Matabeleland, they expressed their incapability or incapacity to deal with such issues. And then my question now comes to say, do we as Africa have instruments that are ready to deal with the challenges that you're facing? Because if you look at it from the global aspect, yes, we do. From the global aspect, yes, we do have the International Code. We do have the United Nations as managing the nations. But as Africa, we'll always talk about these issues. Right now, my brother there raised an issue that touches South Africa. But now, if South Africa has to deal with its brother or sister countries, which instruments do we use to deal with our internal problems as Africans? Because we do not have such instruments. And then at the end of the day, we'll have to go back to the imperialists to also prescribe a solution for us. Then how are we going to arrive to the solutions that we need if we do not have the instruments that are necessary to deal with our problems? Out of racism, we've got issues of tribalism that are rocking us, and they are the very cause of the instability that we see civilly. So how do we come up with instruments to deal with such issues?
Okay, thank you so much. Lunch is ready. It is going to get cold. I will not cut you off 3 minutes, then we go and eat. Who's next? Come right there.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Collins. I'm the president of Nigerian Union South Africa. I'd like to apologize first and foremost for coming late. I just have to be there because this is my heart, and I came in from Limpopo this morning. I didn't want to miss it, but I'm here because I want to be in a forum like this where we discuss some of the things that we've been hearing. So I'm sorry for coming in late. I won't be speaking for more than 2 minutes. I just want to appreciate what my brother said here in terms of when people migrate into another country, they should be able to respect the country where they are. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that. And that is what we've been preaching as an organization, that when you come into a foreign country, first and foremost, you have to abide by the law of the country. Having said that, I would say that most of the speakers here have spoken, about what is going on in Africa. They've spoken in terms of big things, but there is one area which I feel that we've not touched so much. Again, I loved the example that you gave. If we cannot love each other as humans, all these things, all these beautiful grammars, beautiful plans, plans that we have would never succeed. For instance, how does a Zimbabwean see me as a Nigerian? How do I see a South African as an African? If we can get down to those fundamental issues, loving each other first and foremost as humans, and then as Africans, it will be very easy for us to deal with the issues that we are facing in Africa and in our individual countries.
Amen.
I won't want to take much of your time, but this is my heart desire, that we can come together as human beings first and look at what is the problem that my brother is facing and what is the problem that this other brother is facing, irrespective of the country that they are coming from. And how can we assist each other in dealing with those problems so that our children and the generations to come will benefit from whatever is it that is put in place right now. Thank you very much.
You have 10 seconds to announce about the event on Saturday. 10 seconds.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay, Myself here, I'm here with my honourable, our treasurer, which is Honourable Trust Oyele, is here with me. And on Saturday, which is the 27th, we've organized a social cohesion event. A social cohesion event, which means we want to, meet with all Africans. We sit down, South Africans, Zimbabwe, we sit down and discuss what is the problem that you are experiencing from me as a Nigerian, as a community. What is that problem? We want to hear it. And then we as other African migrants, we also want to hear from South Africans. We would also like South Africans to hear from us the challenges that we have faced, so that we sit down, discuss them, and structure a way forward on how to deal with them, so that we can live peacefully and grow this wonderful, beautiful country and economy. Thank you very much.
But where is the venue?
Okay, it's a Magnolia Park. Magnolia. The Magnolia Del Park in Pretoria.
Thank you.
The time is from 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right at the back then. The treasurer.
Thank you so much.
That side? Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Trust Oyele. Like my president, I'm the treasurer of the Nigerian Union of South Africa. I wouldn't have spoken again since the president spoke, but since I came, I was actually representing them. Just fast forwarding, for what he said, just to contribute to that quickly, the event is going to be an event where we showcase even our African traditions, food, cultural settings, and all sorts of things that we all carry as Africans. And I'm going to say this quickly concerning what we are here for today. The After EU is, for us to have a successful one, I think we need a serious collaboration within ourselves. And collaboration doesn't just happen by knowing somebody or mentioning them, but we need a relationship. Do we really have the relationship within us as Africans? Number one, because we might shy away from it. South Africans, Nigerians, Congo, wherever we are. It mentions something about respecting the culture or the tradition of the land. We must also respect those that come from anywhere they come from, in as much as we need to respect each other. It's reciprocal. And we also go to the educational system. He mentioned about Bantu and mentioned that we need an overhaul of our educational system as African. And I think it would be beautiful. How do you expect somebody who's speaking in their language or in a language, a foreign language, to understand chemistry? I'm a science person by my degree. And one of the things I love is when you go to China and other places, they speak in their language to study their. How do you expect someone like that to fail? No, it's impossible. We need to go back to that drawing board to see how we can integrate our system into. I think in Nigeria right now we have a Yoruba AI. I'm an IT specialist. We have an AI that is actually working towards it. We do it in a form whereby it translates our Yoruba language into the science system, and we've seen how we incorporate that into our education system. 1 minute, okay. And family reorientation. It's easy to come here, no matter how oratorical we can be, if we are not being pragmatic about being practical towards actualizing or implementing the things we discuss, it comes to zero. We need to reorientate our family background. Teach your people, teach your children from home. These things begin from home. We don't teach them foreign languages, foreign things. Why we forget our history? And the last thing I will say, which I mentioned in the first thing, is we need a proper relationship with each other, knowing each other. And I want to tell the ADF, please, this kind of gathering should not be for people who are already well informed, like us. Can we integrate this thing into our society in South Africa? People do not have knowledge. When you see people destroying things on the street, not the educated one that is well dressed like my brother there, they are the people who are misinformed. Yes. Some of us will never even do things that is wrong, but those who are not informed, they take up because they feel like the only way I can do it is by violence. Dialogue is one way we can move Africa. He said there is nothing wrong with us that cannot be cured with what is right here with us. We have an answer to our problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I've already put your name in one of our commissions. you are the ADF, my chief at the back. No sihamba siqala khona lesizwe.
Greetings everyone. My name is Tulani Jubane from Wabulawayo, representing the people of Abamanziligazi as Umthwakazi here in South Africa, working hand in hand with the Royal Kingdom of KwaZulu-Natal, the Royal Kingdom of KwaZulu, who are the people that I'm working under. So now, as Africans, today I think we're celebrating Africa Day, but for me, I don't understand why we're celebrating Africa Day, just because we as Africans have got problem. We don't know what exactly are we celebrating. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that just because we are fighting each other tribal. So I think our people needs to be taught their history, because that, I think that's where we must start from. We need to teach our people their history so that they will know who exactly we are. Then if you know who exactly you are, then there will no need for us to be fighting for things that are necessary. So history needs to be taught to our people. That's the most important thing. Sometime 3 days back, I saw a clip that was going through social media whereby a Sutu guy was fighting another Sutu guy coming from Lesotho, telling him to pack his things and go. Because this is his country, he must go back to his country in Lesotho. But now, the problem, the language that they were using, while he's chasing each other, they were using Sutu. They were not speaking English. They were speaking in Sutu. So for me, it was very funny because these people, they understand each other very well. But he's chasing him, he's saying, hey, you are very. How can someone be very while you are speaking the same language? So it's fun. These people need to be taught their history. So I think if we teach each other our history, then things will be better. I know, I don't have anything to say.
Right, I will skip search Fuyana.
Sanbonani, good afternoon. My name is Alphonse Fuyana from Toga's Republic Party, a secessionist or restorationist movement in the western parts of Zimbabwe. We as Mtogazians, we say we not gonna celebrate Africa Day because the very same Africa has swept under the carpet a genocide which killed over 1 million of our people. I say 1 million while other books say 20,000. But until someone gives us the official figure of how many of our people were killed by Mugabe's regime from 1980 to 1987, we are going to keep that figure at 1 million and counting going upwards. So I heard my sister there saying we need to silence the guns. But my question to the panel and all academics in Africa is how can we silence the guns when governments within our republics marginalize, subjugate and genocide their people? Our languages in Zimbabwe, the Ndebele language, is being completely destroyed. Our homes are being taken over. The farms which were previously white-owned have been taken over by our new native colonialists in the form of people from Harare. I will not say the Shona for fear of being called tribal, but that's the bottom line. Shonas are occupying our land. In our schools, our children are being taught in Shona. But then when we pick up arms, Africa in the SADC, instead of coming to fix the root cause of that conflict, they will come with helicopters, Apaches to bomb us, like we saw in Cabo Delgado. The whole of SADC, including Rwanda, they went and bombed those people in northern Mozambique, accusing them of being terrorists. How can someone be a terrorist when he's trying to protect his own lands? When one is trying, like in Mozambique, they looted all the resources in Cabo Delgado to develop Maputo. Those people have got a right to fight their own land. The people of Amazon have got a right to fight for their land. The people of Mtwagas have got a right to fight for their land as well. The people of Western Sahara have got a right to fight for their land. So as Africans, we must be truthful with each other. Before internal problems, tribalism, marginalization is fixed within our countries, there will be conflict in Africa. If America if China comes to me today and says, I'm giving you an AK-47 to go and fight for our people, I'm going to take it. Because Africa has failed to stand up for the marginalized within its borders. Thank you.
There is my sister here. Let me skip you, Chief. There's my sister here.
Sanbonani, Lochani, Ututu Oma, Kongo in Bote, Mauka, Mbanjwa, Saba Alka. It's African languages. It's saying Sanbonani. So I'm noticing that we are allowing us to be captured in the mind. We have been captured in our mind for so long. France, Portuguese, England, and USA really has made a damage to our African people. Not forgetting to introduce myself. My name is Tembi Manana. I'm from African People's First. I'm the spokesperson for the Women's League of African People's First. In the location, I'm also a whistleblower. I apologize for coming late, and I apologize for not acknowledging I was supposed to be one of the speakers. So due to electricity, we don't have electricity close to 4 weeks now. In the morning and at night. You can see. So electricity is becoming one of our, I don't know, we are prisoners of electricity. So I don't know, I'm trying to cover what I was supposed to say, but thank you for our speakers.
You have 2 minutes.
Yes. You know what? We are the instruments for the solution. Let's not give up South Africans. Let's not give up African brothers and sisters. We are here to win it, isn't it? Yeah. We can still say Happy African Day. This is an initiative to go somewhere. So, to name a few, we have supported the Mzilikazi forums, we have supported Umtwakazi Nation by going to government. We faced government. Our president, Hlengwa, went to spoke with the Minister of Home Affairs that the Mtwakazi, we heard their stories. We want them to gain the citizenship of South Africa, to gain the ideas for their children that have studied here, because it's really unfair what they have told us. So, to name the few, as African people, we have made, as Africans, we must make this awareness of these African people, of our struggles. We as Africans, we don't know our struggles. We don't know ourselves. Can this not stop here? Can this go to our location where the government go and perpetrate our people and telling them to vote for them? They don't know. Sorry, I apologize for them. They don't know our history. We don't know each other. What we know to hate each other. They've destroyed our education. They destroy our religion, our culture. South Africa, Africa, it's very beautiful. Let's practice our Ubuntu. Let's practice to know our race. And let's bring back our Afro-modalism. Our technology is very bad, we don't know anything. Our trade in 2019, we were at 2% in trading in Africa.
Thank you so much.
While our raw materials are being 80% going out.
Thank you, Comrade. I'll give you 1.5 minutes, Comrade Brian, because we came late.
Protocols observed. I am Brian Mzringa from Disabled Migrants Rights Networking Organization, and I feel happy to be inclusive. There's inclusiveness within the environment because I'm the only person with disability. Then these are the good indicators that our Ubuntu and empathy is being seen in your tolerance. Comrade Fundi, before I could ask my questions, Thank you very much. I thought you were going to say you were the former director of Diaspora Labour Institute Education, of which I'm a beneficiary after you saw me at COSATU. You took me to school. I went to University of Western Cape. I did political economy, and it was not easy. And I'm still using their offices. That's where I am best because of you. So I think if we could have many Africans who can sacrifice and risk their jobs for other people, it's very rare. Even the mere fact that you associate with us, in your communities, you shall be called names and stuff and all that, because there's too much disinformation. So coming to the issue of, from why I came late, my leader, General, I thought I was going to hear climate change migration and its impact caused by neoliberals. South Africa at the moment is #1 in Africa as the worst polluter because of Sasol and Malasheni and stuff. And the consequences already seen from the Natal internal migration. Already people will be displaced in future. So as a perpetrator, as much as you only see the push and pull factor, but are you aware that you are part of the problem into those countries again from such consequences? Doc, Mama, I would say, thank you. Is there political will from the government to implement all the ratifications which are very progressive, African Charter, National Action Plan, which addresses all this? As much as South Africa is one of the 6 countries in the region which have respected and also shown the willingness to be one of the accountable government, but there is no willing to implement on the grassroots. So last thing which I would say, it goes to Professor Abdul. There's too many invisible hands in your country. And I thought you were going to cover the issue of secession, where we get where you are, so that in future we learn from such case studies. Because now, I'm a communist, he recruited me. I'm just going to, that's why your face. I would say, I thought, yes, I respect Russia. But Russia and America, they're exercising their power in your country. Nobody's talking about that. You see, and they are part of this problem. And it's coming even here. South Africa is a country. Right now, at night you're dealing with America. During the day you work with Russia. And you're making things difficult. The rand, that's why it's losing buying power. So I would say, leader, all the people who are here, I think you're telling each other good things to the wrong people. We know. The people we need to educate are out there. But unfortunately, we don't have resources and money. Because funders, they need to be answerable to us. They are funding researchers who pile up good work which is not being made to use. We need to challenge those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Cindy. So I was going to close with a word of prayer for us. I didn't recognize my sister, Helen. We work with them. They are a powerhouse. If you know the buses going to Zimbabwe, they have their offices there. They have been assisting lots of migrants there. They have an office, even though the buses will be making noise, they have offices up there. We work together. I was meant to ask the panelists, I'm subjecting you, Chief. I was meant to give...
It's a point of order.
I gave you 4 minutes, Chief. What's the point of order now?
No, but the point of order is something that I can't take out of my mind. Please, next time is an African Diaspora Forum. The South African flag is smaller than those flags.
No, we spoke about it yesterday. Thank you. I was supposed to give our panelists 3 minutes each to respond, but let me not do that. Because, sorry, comrades, we have been given up to 1 o'clock in this place. So what we are going to do, Comrade Helen, I've just recognized you. Be disciplined. Right, so what we are going to do, as I said, that we have a register, we are going to take this discussion further. They are going to respond in our social media platforms, including the former Minister of Trade and Industry. We'll give him all the comments that you have made. What we are going to do now, we'll invite Comrade Moxim for 5 minutes to do a vote of thanks. Then after that, Comrade Dorothy is going to direct us where we walk from here to. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas Mabena. We call him our executive director, so thank you for this morning. I'm surprised he gave me 5 minutes. I thought 2 minutes would be enough. I'm reminded of the speaker who was asked to do a vote of thanks. And the vote of thanks went on and on. And from the 100 people in the audience, eventually 50 was left, and then 30, and then 20, and then about 10, and then 1 was left. And the speaker then turned to the one person remaining in the hall and said, "Thank you very much, sir. You really appreciate a good vote of thanks. I really appreciate your presence here." And the gentleman got up and said, "Sorry, sir, man. I'm the janitor. I'm supposed to lock up your... I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you to finish your speech." So I hope I'm not going to end up in that situation. The theme for today, and I'm just going to try and just touch on very briefly on what all the speakers said, was deliberately contrasted with the political turmoil, the instability, the lack of peace on our continent, contrasted to the hope we have for a better continent, one that is prosperous, that develops. So our comrade Rob Davis, he spoke to us about the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which in a way is showing us there's light at the end of the tunnel if we apply our minds and if we come together as a people and as a continent. Our comrade Ian gave a good analysis, maybe I can call it a geopolitical, scientific analysis of what really is happening now on our continent. And sometimes we tend to forget that what the analysis requires is a bit of a scientific understanding of what is happening in our country, and he gave us an idea of the reasons behind load shedding, etc., etc. My sister non-tobacco was always very good in her understanding of the reasons and the causes of why Africa is so unstable. In particular, I think our sister just mentioned the whole question of, our brother mentioned the whole question of climate change. It's going to lead to much greater instability on our continent, and she touched on it. And of course, we thank you very much, Dr. Mava, for giving us that background, and a background also of what's happening in South Africa. We thank you all for your contributions here this afternoon and this morning. Just very briefly, the African Diaspora Forum is about dealing with the issues around migration. And of course, the issues of migration provides a broader context for what all the speakers said today. On the one hand, migrants are the victims of a lot of things happening. We see our brothers and sisters drowning in the Mediterranean. I read a report last week where the Greek government, non-tobacco will say to us, the cradle of civilization, they put about 100 and odd migrant mothers and children in a boat. It makes me emotional saying it. They tow them out into the middle of the Aegean Sea and left them. If it wasn't for the Turkish Navy to rescue them, they would have also drowned. The cradle of civilization. We see what is happening in the United States. They're trying to put up a wall. But I want to say, in context of the African Diaspora Forum and the whole issue of migration, just a statistic for you to bear in mind. Today, as we speak, there are 100 million migrants on the move. And in terms of what Ian and others spoke about, the colonial borders, etc., etc., the good news is that migrants are challenging these borders all over the world. If you just take the United States, our dear friend Mr. Donald Trump tried to build this wall, but as we speak, the last figure I read about, there are about 400 South Americans who are camped on the Rio Grande wanting to enter the United States. Eventually they're going to destroy that wall. The Europeans tried to build this, what they call Fortress Europe. In other words, they built this thing that's like a castle. In other words, they inside and nobody else will be allowed to come in. It's crumbling. For as long as they are destabilizing the Middle East, for instance, Syria and all these places, migrants are challenging that concept of fortress Europe. And in South Africa, I think we are hopeful that migrants will also make that contribution, not only to our society, and it's a fundamental principle of the ADF, that migrants are here for the improvement and the betterment of the society in totality. Yes, there are issues, there are other issues about the situation in the country itself, but ultimately migrants will help to bring this country's economy back on its feet and help to make this a greater and a much more diverse society. Let me not be like the other person who delivered a vote of thanks. I see Mabema is already fidgeting in his chair. Thank you, comrades, on the panel for your contribution and for making the time to speak to us today. And in absentia also to Rob Davis for his input on the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And I think Mabena made the point that because we're living in the age of technology and digital environment, this debate must continue. And we will try and keep it alive, take all the points that were made here today, and please interact with us on our social media platform. Lastly but not least, I must thank you, the audience, for coming here today. You know, for the organizers like us who put these things together, and it gets to 10 o'clock and there's about 2 people, and I get the anxious calls from Nicholas Mabena, hey man, where are the people? Then we worry, you know, whether we're going to have an audience. So thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Moxine Williams. He grew up in Cape Town. He's a journalist by training. He's former editor of the Star newspaper. He also edited the New Age. He's a chairman of the trustees of the African Diaspora Forum. So if you have some money to donate to the ADF, it will be in safe hands. As a trustee, he oversees all our finances. So feel free to empty your pockets for the work of the African Diaspora Forum. Comrade Doro?